Crash Course into Constitution and Tissue States presented by Hidden Hollow Holistics. First off, my name is Juanita. You can call me Wani. My work centers around life, loss, and liminality, honoring the transitions and transformations that define our human experience. As an eclectic herbalist and intermundium, I collaborate with the spirits of herbs to support these pivotal moments, weaving their wisdom into practices that nurture the body, mind, heart, and spirit. So today, we're going to talk about constitution and tissue states. Western herbal energetics is a system that helps us understand how herbs interact with the body based on temperature, moisture, and tension. This approach recognizes that imbalance in the body often comes from excess or deficiency in these qualities, and herbs can help restore equilibrium. Understanding your constitution. That means your inherent energetic pattern. Some folks will run warm, others will tend towards dryness. Some will struggle with excess tension or laxity. To assess your constitution, some things that you might want to consider is, do you run hot or cold? Is your skin or digestion dry or moist? Do you experience tightness or tension? Maybe sluggishness or weakness? And some of the ways that we can tell those things is when we think about whether or not we run hot or cold. Do you walk around most of the time needing a sweater? Is your skin dry? Does it look like it's cracked? Does it look kind of like the Sahara Desert? Do you need a lot of moisturizer on your skin, or perhaps it even bleeds a little? I am a very dry person who also happens to run a little cold. And I also am a very tense person. And so understanding where you are in your baseline is really important because many people have mixed constitutions. They are going to be somewhere on that pendulum, and it's going to vary based sometimes on the day, what they have going on, maybe what they ate. So understanding your baseline helps you choose herbs and lifestyle changes that keep you balanced. Applying energetics to herbalism. When selecting herbs, we look at how energetics complement or counterbalance a person's state. So, if you're a hot, tense person, you probably could benefit from some cooling, relaxing herbs, something like chamomile or skullcap. If you're a cold, damp person, you may need a little warming and drying up, so ginger or sage could be really helpful. A dry, lax person could be really supported by moistening and toning herbs like marshmallow root or raspberry leaf. By matching herbs to the body's needs, we can work with the body's natural rhythms rather than against them. So there are 6 tissue states that we're going to be diving into. That's hot versus cold, dry versus damp, tense versus lax. These states describe patterns of imbalance in the body and guide us in choosing the right herbs to restore a balance. Now, as we go through these, you're going to notice that I'm going to be looking at these from not just a physical aspect, but how does the energetic show up mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Because I like to look at all of the ways that these energetics can show up because we are more than just a body. So let's dive into it. Hot. Hot can be an sign of excess heat, inflammation, overactivity in the body. You're going to see things when we talk about physical heat as red, inflamed skin, like you're going to see redness for sure. Inflamed skin, heat in the body, sweating, rapid pulse, a tendency towards fever, maybe be thirsty. Mentally hot, it's usually associated with overactivity, those racing thoughts, being impatient or impulsive. Emotionally, we're going to talk about things like anger and passion, excitement. These emotions often rise quickly and can feel overwhelming. Spiritually, heat can be associated with things like being overzealous, urgency, intensity, or even something like being burnt out. Herbs that are really helpful here are things that are going to be cooling, moistening, anti-inflammatory. So think peppermint, chamomile, violet. Those are just a couple of them. There are so many more. And that's, I think, important thing to note here as we are going through these slides is when we talk about herbs, I'm focusing on their attributes and their characteristics. I am not so much focused on the specific herbs themselves. Um, I think it's more important for us to be able to focus on their herbal actions as well as their energetics. So, cold. Cold is a deficiency, it's underactivity, it's poor circulation. Physical cold is usually associated with like cold extremities, pale skin, slow circulation, low energy, those cold hands, warm heart kind of thing. Like that's always a saying that I got told as a child because I had extremely cold hands, cold feet, poor circulation at the end of the day. Mentally, cold is often associated with things like slowness, indecision, apathy, and a lack of focus at times. Emotionally, it can show up as things like depression, detachment, fear, and numbness. Cold emotions can feel heavy, slow moving, and difficult to shake. Spiritual coldness is also often associated with that numbness, that apathy or detachment. So, when we start talking about herbs that can be supportive for a cold state, we're going to talk about things that are warming, circulating, stimulating. So, ginger, cinnamon, cayenne, they're going to get things moving in there. They're going to bring the heat. Dry. I know this one well. Physically dry, we're talking rough skin, brittle hair, chapped lips, constipation, and dehydration. It's often a sign of atrophy. You're definitely deficient in fluids when we're dry. Mentally dry, it can be associated with like mental dullness, a lack of creativity, or cognitive inflexibility. People talk about like a dry sense of humor. Emotionally, we're going to associate it with things like loneliness, isolation, sadness, and emptiness. Dryness often correlates with feeling disconnected and unsupportive. And as somebody who runs dry, I can tell you because there's not a lot of fluid there, and that fluid allows for that flexibility and engagement. It can be just like that emotionally. There is a lack of engagement. And so that causes an isolation, not that you don't want to be around people, but because you have no emotional flexibility to be able to give and take, it often causes you to become isolated, whether that's due to self-isolation or isolation from other people. Spiritually, dryness is often associated with barrenness, disconnection, or isolation. So I think that disconnection is a really big piece there that I can speak to personally. So, moistening, demulcent herbs, so we're talking things like marshmallow root, which is one of my very favorite ones. Licorice, oats, those are definitely going to be moistening, as well as nourishing. Damp. That's too much moisture. Talk about stagnation, congestion. Physical dampness is associated with like swollen tissues, water retention, bloating, sluggishness, especially in the digestion, oily or moist skin. Mental dampness is often associated with like foggy thinking, overwhelm, difficulty focusing. Emotionally, dampness can be seen as lethargy, that emotional overwhelm, sadness, grief, although some people's grief can be very dry as well. Dampness can correspond to feeling emotionally bogged down and suffocated. And I think when we start thinking about that excess fluid, or that can make sense. Some of these things, when you start thinking about the energetics of damp and the way that it expresses itself physically, the way that it can express itself emotionally, mentally, and spiritually start really making sense. Spiritual dampness is often associated with stagnation, confusion, or emotional overwhelm. So we're going to look to herbs that are drying, astringent, diuretic. So to help move those fluids, to help dry them out. So nettles, yarrow, black walnut, those are things that are going to be really helpful there. Tense. Know this one well. Physical tenseness is associated with those tight, rigid muscles, the tension headaches, jaw clenching. Most of the pain is often found right up in here. And restricted movement. Mental tension is associated with things like anxiety, rigidity, hyperfocus. Emotional tenseness ends up with things like anxiety, fear, worry, stress, and rigidity. Often correlates with holding on too tightly, creating emotional stress. Spiritual tenseness is also associated with that rigidity, anxiety, or even hypervigilance. Really turning to things that are relaxing. Nervines are really my best friend here. Things that are antispasmodic are also very helpful. I'm going to think of things like skullcap, valerian, lavender. There's really a lot here that can be very helpful for a tense state. Excuse me, let me take some sip of my tea. So lax. Lax, I like to think of like knows no boundaries, just all over the place. With you think of weakness as like such a bad word, but it's not. It's a lack of tone at the end of the day. There's not a lot of borders there. We don't have good borders. We don't have good boundaries. So physical lackness it's often associated with weak muscles, or like weak muscle tone, sagging skin, loose or sluggish digestion, low energy. Mental lax is like perhaps looked at as like mental laziness, lack of motivation, or disengagement. And I really don't like the laziness bit. I think that kind of gets a bad rap as well. I think it's more that maybe they're not so type A, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing. But not having focus is also not great for us sometimes, especially when we need to. And so it's not to say that any of these states are better than the other. It's more about what kind of state do you need to be in, and what are the things that can support you into getting into that state. And so I think that's where herbs can really help us get into the states that we need to be in to achieve the things that we want to achieve. So when we start talking about, emotional laxicity, I'm thinking things like indifference, apathy, fatigue, complacency. Lax emotions can feel like emotional laziness or a lack of motivation. It's just don't care. Whatever. The whatever is what I feel. Spiritually lax is often associated with complacency, passivity, or fatigue. So I think it's important to think about the fact that all bodies are different, bodies are dynamic. Humans are living expressions of dynamic energies, with each body reflecting a unique combination of elemental forces that shape physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual experiences. The interplay of temperature, moisture, and tension within the body influences how energy moves, manifests, and transforms. A person with a hot, dry constitution may experience bursts of passion and insight, but struggle with burnout, while one with cold, damp tendencies may feel weighed down by stagnation, needing warmth and movement to restore balance. These energetics are not fixed states, but shifting patterns influenced by lifestyle, environment, and inner work. By recognizing these patterns, we can better support our well being through herbs, rituals, and practices that restore harmony. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. We are not stuck in any one place. Herbs are incredibly supportive in helping us shift from one state to the other. And so with that, I have one last slide, and it kind of just goes through some like the action formula from the American Herbalist Guild that has some great information that goes through some of the herbal actions. The Herbal Academy has a really great blog post around herbal terminology, energetic herbalism. I really love this book, so I wanted to include that as additional reading if any of you guys are interested. And I just wanted to thank you. I hope that you subscribe, follow along, but most of all, stay curious and have a great day.